This is always my favorite, the 1-star review. I have to admit that I have not read this book. Hi, I'm Sarah. Welcome back to my channel. Today, I'm going to be reading 1-star reviews on Goodreads and maybe Amazon too of my favorite books. So I recently did a video where I gave some 1-star reviews of books that I had read. I know maybe some of those books that I gave 1 star are other people's favorite books. And it's kind of hard sometimes to hear that opinion. But, you know, I think I can take it. You know, I want to kind of, in case there's anybody out there whose favorite book I gave a 1-star review to, I'm going to show that, you know, let me get a little bit of revenge and see me reading 1-star reviews of some of my favorite books. So for my favorite books, I'm going to be using the top 5 favorite books that I talked about in my video with my sister, where we tried to guess each other's top 5 favorite books. If you haven't watched that, go ahead and take a look. And starting off, my number 5 was actually the Animorphs series. So I think I'm just going to kind of look at reviews for the first book, maybe also the last one. So I've got my husband's iPad right here. Aaron said it reads like a kid's book, but with pretty dark themes. I'm not sure what I think about characterization. It could have used more female characters for sure. I mean, that's reasonable. Of the 6 main characters, 2 are female. I think that was done kind of intentionally, just to draw in more readers. I think girls are more likely to read a book with a male protagonist, especially as young kids, than young boys are to read a book with a female protagonist. It really is simply written, this is from Arwen, I'd say about a 3rd grade level, but the content is more junior high level. I think younger kids would find this book really scary and would be unsatisfied with the ending. Younger kids wouldn't be able to separate the fiction from the truth, and it doesn't seem like older kids would be interested in it. So a lot of people are saying that this book has intense dark themes for the level it's written at. That's not untrue. So these are probably aimed at preteens to late elementary school, which is when I started reading them. And they do deal with darker themes. I read them when I was about 8. I wasn't traumatized, but I could see how that would be a concern if you were a parent. No one ever censored what I read as a kid, so I find it weird that, not weird, I find it different that people do it. It is what it is. People are free to raise their children as they see fit. I do disagree with the comment, Jamie, that said it was poorly written and that the characters are crappy. I don't agree with that. I think it is appropriately written for the grade level it's written at, and I think the characters are the strongest point of it. The character arc that each of them goes through individually is very different and personalized, and I think above and beyond what you usually see in children's literature. All right, I'm also going to look at reviews for the final book of the Animorphs series, because I think that one will have possibly even more 1-star reviews, because I think a lot of people, myself included, have some very strong opinions on it, so I'm curious to see how the ratings are. I love the entire series, but this last book was awful. The writing was good, but what happened to the characters was entirely dissatisfying. So I actually disagree with this review. My problem with the last book is not what happened to the characters. The entire last third of the book or so was spent on this extra mission that ends in a cliffhanger. That was the unnecessary part, in my opinion. We could have used those extra pages, that extra last third of the book, to further develop what happened to everybody. I'm okay with where they ended up, but I want to know more about it. And there were other storylines that I wanted wrapped up as well. Everybody of his family just disappears at the end of this book, or at the end of the series, which is kind of disappointing, because the last few books is when we really started to get involved more with their families, and then they just disappear. So now that I'm older and looking back, I like the bold move of they won the war, but everybody didn't live happily ever after. But I did not like the overall execution of the book, if that makes sense. All right, next I'm going to look at Julie and Julia, and I think this one will have some opinionated 1-star reviews, so let's get into that. Okay, so this is pretty much what I expected. So a lot of these reviews are long, so I don't want to read them all, but just basically, she's a foul-mouthed, self-centered idiot whose name should never be mentioned in the same breath with Julia Child, who was and is a cooking goddess and a great lady. Julie is a completely repulsive, unappealing, and vulgar human being. A distasteful book from an obnoxious woman who should be officially banned from any kitchen, including her own. Sorry, Julie Powell, you seem like a miserably unpleasant person. I pity your husband. I think she's a whiny, self-absorbed, selfish, shallow bitch. And that's kind of the theme I see with people that didn't like this book. This one in general, I feel like people just, I don't want to have to go there, but I think it's because she's a woman and and she's swearing, and she's admitting she's not good at housekeeping, and she's admitting that she's messing up cooking and messing up recipes. And I think a lot of people just have like this weird bitterness about the fact that she started kind of a silly blog and got success from it. The fact that Powell has made a mint and been able to become a so-called food writer on the basis of this book is one more example of the American Idol school of success. Mediocrity with good publicity. This, I think, boils down to what people don't like about this book, or specifically don't like about Julie Powell, is she did something kind of silly and it became hugely successful and she made a lot of money off of it. People feel like it wasn't deserved, and I think that's the place a lot of the hatred for this book comes from. Alright, next up, The Devil Wears Prada. There's some similarities in the overlap between people that disliked Julia and people that dislike this book, and why, and I'm kind of expecting the same kind of angry reviews. The only reason I waste words on this piece of trash is that it holds the distinction of being the worst book I ever read. The title was held previously, for a good 15 years, by the Bridges of Madison County, and it took some doing to surpass that awfulness. Okay, I didn't like the Bridges of Madison County either. Okay, so here's something that I expected to see. So it says, this is Lafcadio? So many of the things Andrea complains about in this book fall under the category of doing your job. Sure, the job sucks, but it also has unbelievable perks. Running all over town seems like a hassle, but A, that's your job, and B, you get chauffeured on those errands, wearing free designer clothes, with a nearly unlimited expense account. That is something I do think is kind of a legitimate criticism of the book, is that when you're reading it, it really doesn't seem that bad. Yes, she has to work hellish hours, and her boss is incredibly mean to her, but also she's 23, and it's her first job out of college, and I don't think that's that crazy of a concept to a lot of us. Most people have worked at some job that was awful, but that we did not get tons of free designer clothing and free meals and free Starbucks and all the other stuff she gets out of it. So I do think when you're reading it, it's hard to feel sorry for her sometimes. This was never ending. There was just so much bitching and complaining and horror stories about this boss that it was almost painful to read after a while. I don't know that complaining about there being too much about the bad boss is legitimate for this book, because that's literally what the book was about. But yeah. There's a lot of people in these reviews that liked the film and didn't like the book, and I can see that. The film is definitely like easier to consume in that the plot's much more straightforward. It's very neat. Everything's kind of tied up, and both Miranda and Andy are definitely softened up a bit for the movie. Honestly, I think people just prefer the movie to this one, and I think the book was more successful and popular before the movie came out, and that was out there to compare it to. All right, and Harry Potter. Obviously, like, this is a very beloved book with a ton of reviews, so I'm curious what the people that didn't like this one say about it. The people that really didn't like it. So the top review is actually given by Voldemort. And it's a 1-star review saying, "This is a disgrace to all purebloods. My head looked quite dashing on that strange professor's head. If only I could have extended my stay. Harry Potter, this is not over yet." Okay. This is one that I think is legitimately by someone who did not like this book and has like actual reasons for it. Harry Potter is more of a Mary Sue than Aragon, more than Nancy Drew, more than the worst of fan fiction I've seen. He's rich, popular, and famous for absolutely nothing of his own doing. He destroys the power of the big bad guy before he's a year old. He has the whole angsty past down pat. He instantly becomes the best at flying without ever having done it before, wasting all the older and more experienced flyers. I mean, I do think that's fair. I've seen people say before that, you know, Harry Potter's kind of the hero of the nerds, but in reality, he's like a popular, wealthy jock, which, not a bad point. Harry wasn't any excuse for a hero. He did nothing. He just sat around and had things happen to him. End of story. His fame was inherited, his fortune was inherited, he lived with his relations and allowed them to bully him and couldn't even manage to read his own mail. The plot is so unoriginal. Can anyone say Cinderella? Orphan child mysteriously left with a mean, boring family who doesn't want him and treats him terribly. Discovers that he really belongs to a world beyond his wildest dreams, and that he's very, very rich. Almost immediately, he's at home there. Sure, he has his enemies, but who doesn't? And they get dealt with anyway. Added to which, it turns out that his parents are super cool. I mean, these are some other not unvalid criticisms of Harry Potter. It is very tropey. It is written for children. Children love tropes. Honestly, everybody loves tropes. The reason tropes are tropes is because people like them and they work. Sometimes you need these things to get a plot to work. Anybody who tells me they've only read Harry Potter and or the Da Vinci Code scares me even more. Okay, I'm not saying you shouldn't branch out from those two books if for some reason those are the only two books you've ever read. But like, popular things are popular for a reason. Even if they're not perfect, there's some kind of merit to them or something about them that made a lot of people like them. And at a certain point, people start wanting to feel like they're better than everybody else for not liking them. And that's what that one sounds like to me. Oh, here's a fun one. Harry Potter is like 50 Shades of Grey. The hype about the books is what sold the books. The books themselves suck. Again, I don't think that's true. 50 Shades of Grey, and again, not hating on anyone who likes that book, but it's being sold for a very specific reason, and that specific reason is not its literary skill. Whereas Harry Potter does actually, it's a good story. There is good story in there. Obviously, when you have something like Harry Potter, everybody can pick it apart for decades and point out all the plot holes and the little things that got slipped up and missed. But in general, they're very tightly plotted. They're good books. What I haven't seen on here yet is any like Harry Potter will teach children to be Satanists posts, which I thought there might be a few serious ones of, but I have not actually seen any of those. Okay, here's a good one. My mother had originally given me this book when I was about 12 years old, so probably in 1999-2000. At the time, I had already had other classic children's literature under my belt, such as the Chronicles of Narnia, and I had also just finished reading The Hobbit. So when I was given this, it looked a little silly, but I decided to give it a go. I think I managed to get as far as Harry actually getting to Hogwarts before I pitched it. At the time, Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone was enough below my reading level that I just couldn't get into it. First off, like Chronicles of Narnia and The Hobbit are in fact children's literature, so like the haughty tone for having read them as a child is a little much for me. But if you only read till Harry got to Hogwarts, you missed out on 95% of the magical part of the book. Like that's when the magic really starts. And as for being too old for them, I think 12 years old is the perfect age to start reading these books. That's when I started reading it. Some people are just really impressed with themselves. Alright, and Something Borrowed by Emily Giffin. I've got a pretty good idea what the one-star reviews for this are mostly going to say. I only acknowledge that I read this book so I can say how much I hated it. The two main characters are completely unlikable, one for being completely self-absorbed and selfish, and the other for being so spineless and whiny. So spineless, in fact, the action of her sleeping with her friend's fiance wasn't even a credible one. The further I got into it, the more I was disgusted with it. I also found it very difficult to believe that at age 30, the two characters would continue to be friends. This lack of credibility was the biggest crack in an already weak foundation for the book. If that's the biggest problem you had with that book, that someone that was 30 was still friends with their childhood best friend, let me show you some pictures of me and my best friends. My biggest problem with the overall message seemed to be that as long as your best friend is a bitch, it's okay to sleep with her fiance. That's a fair criticism of this book. Everyone lies. Every single character, except maybe the heroine's doorman. I couldn't find a single redeeming thing about any of the characters in this book. They lie, cheat, sleep around, judge each other. I can't figure out why this book is popular enough to be made into a movie. I mean, that's another fair one in that there is a lot of lying and cheating and backstabbing going on in this book. But again, everybody lies. The other problem I have with this book is that Rachel's a smart, educated woman who basically allowed herself to be used by Dex. That's true. Like, honestly, if you read this book, like on some of my rereads, like Dex is really frustrating and honestly kind of unlikable. He strings Rachel along for a long time. And I didn't particularly like him as much as Rachel did. I will say that the romance in this book was not what I read it for. Like, I was not rooting for Rachel and Dex specifically. I did not have any particular attachment to Dex. But the truth of the story is that it's not about Dex. It's about Rachel and Darcy and their friendship. It just seemed to me that if Darcy was so horrible to Rachel, why is she still friends with her and her maid of honor? Honestly, it just seemed to me as if the author was trying to explain why it was okay that Rachel and Dex were cheating on their best friend slash fiance. Fair criticisms. When my sister reread this book recently, she actually pointed out some things that I didn't remember. Rachel complaining about throwing a bachelorette party for Darcy and how expensive it was. And she thought it was like really sad for women, 30-year-old women, to be out, you know, at the bars having a good time, acting like they were 21. Get over yourself, Rachel. There are problems with this book, and that seems to be mostly the focus of the reviews. Like, the reviews, the people that didn't like this book, I see why, and I respect their reasons for that. This review and a couple other that I'm seeing from May 2020, so recently, is actually about Emily Giffin and something that she posted on her Twitter. I'm surprised none of those popped up about J.K. Rowling under Harry Potter, actually, but there's a few of these that are actually not about the book, but more about people having the problems with the author. Alright, so that were 1-star reviews of books that I love. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you'd like to see more videos, subscribe to my channel, and please give this video a thumbs up, and let me know in the comments, what did you think? Have you read these books? Do you disagree or agree with the reviews I read? What did you think? Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.